Tonight, we enter the oldest library ever lifted from mud, not beneath polished marble, but under the hard river clay of southern Iraq. In the 19th century, archaeologists working across Mesopotamia began uncovering clay tablets marked with wedge-shaped signs. Later scholars at the British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, and Yale helped read those signs with patient hands and tired eyes. What they found was not only trade, taxes, grain, and kings. They found memories of a world that Sumerian scribes placed before ordinary human history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, write your location and local time below. It is strange, is it not, to think that people far apart can listen together while an older world slowly opens. You are standing in the warm dark near the Euphrates, where the air smells of wet reeds, river silt, and smoke from distant hearths. The ground is soft at the edges of the marsh. Your sandals press into mud that remembers the feet of fishermen, priests, farmers, scribes, and strangers with baskets on their backs. Above you, the stars appear sharper than they do in any modern city, because there is no electric haze to soften them. The sky seems enormous. The silence does not feel empty. It feels watched. Somewhere nearby, a reed hut creaks in the night wind. A dog gives one low bark, then thinks better of it. Even the insects sound careful, as though the dark belongs to something older than men and women. In this place, the Sumerians imagined the beginning of cities, kingship, temples, and labor. They did not begin their stories with comfort. They began with work, hunger, noise, water, and command. Records confirm that Sumerian cities such as Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Eridu formed part of one of the earliest urban worlds known to archaeology. Excavations led by major institutions, including American university teams in Mesopotamia, revealed temples, seals, administrative tablets, and city plans that show organized life on a remarkable scale. The mainstream fact is plain enough. Sumer was not a fantasy. It was brick, grain, labor, accounting, and power. Yet the tablets also preserve something stranger. They speak of times when the great divine powers ruled, planned, argued, and divided the world among themselves. The stories are not modern history in the usual sense. They are not newspaper reports with dates and neat signatures. They are religious memory, royal tradition, mythic explanation, and perhaps something more elusive. Still, they were written down by real scribes using real tools, in real cities, beneath real skies heavy with dust and heat. You imagine a scribe seated low beside a clay tablet, his stylus held between careful fingers. He presses one small mark, then another, into the damp surface. Each sign is simple, but together they become a doorway. His hand moves through lists of offerings, names of gods, lines of kings, old hymns, and stories inherited from voices already ancient to him. He is not trying to entertain you. He is trying to preserve order. That detail matters, because in Sumer, writing begins largely as administration, yet it becomes memory. A sheep counted for a temple can sleep beside a myth of creation. A jar of beer can share the same clay universe as a divine assembly. That is the beautiful inconvenience of ancient evidence. The ordinary and the impossible live close together, and neither asks your permission. Scholars still debate how much of these early traditions reflects ritual imagination, political theology, or memories reshaped from deep social change. Some researchers read the stories as symbolic accounts of irrigation, agriculture, and kingship. Others see a more layered archive where old catastrophes, migrations, and forgotten rulers became wrapped in sacred language. Nobody serious needs to shout about it. The mystery is quieter than that. It waits inside broken lines. Your mind drifts toward a storeroom full of tablets, stacked like dry leaves from a vanished forest. Some are complete. Some are cracked across the middle. Some have edges missing, where the very word you most want has crumbled away. A curator lifts one gently, and centuries of dust seem to pause in the air. The tablet is small enough to hold in one hand, yet it carries a horizon. On that horizon, the Sumerians placed beings who came before human beings carried their full burden. The gods were not vague clouds of light. They had names, roles, tempers, households, rivalries, and responsibilities. They governed the sky, the waters, the earth, the grain, the storms, the decrees of fate, and the dark below. They were powerful, but not always peaceful. They were eternal in atmosphere, yet strangely tired in behavior. That is the unsettling part. The old stories often show divine order as strained, divided, and heavy. Creation is not presented as a sweet garden scene where everything is already gentle. It feels more like an immense estate, badly managed, with canals to dig and food to produce. The universe has paperwork. Even heaven has chores. There is a gentle absurdity here, and perhaps a very human one. The Sumerians could imagine God shaping destiny, but they also imagined them complaining about labor. In one famous strand of Mesopotamian tradition, lesser divine workers grow weary from digging canals and maintaining the earth. The idea is almost funny, in a dry and dusty way. Even the gods appear to need a better staffing plan. Then the mood cools, because if divine labor becomes unbearable, something must change. If the older order cannot continue as it is, something new must be made. In the Sumerian and broader Mesopotamian imagination, humanity does not appear simply as a crown placed upon creation. Humanity appears as an answer to a problem. You are not born into the story as a king at first. You are born as a solution. Perhaps that is why the earliest tablets feel so haunting. They do not flatter you too quickly. They do not say humans arrived because the universe was lonely and wanted applause. They suggest a harder thought, spoken softly through clay. People may have been created to serve, to maintain, to feed the temples, to carry baskets, to raise walls, to keep the rhythm moving. The scent of river mud thickens. You look across the plain and imagine the first city rising slowly, not in one glorious moment, but brick by brick under a punishing sun. Men lift clay, women grind grain, children watch smoke curl from ovens, priests climb temple platforms and look toward a sky filled with power. Somewhere in the distance, a canal glitters like a cut in the earth. Water is life here, but water is also threat. The Sumerian world teaches that civilization depends on fragile control. Too little water, and the fields fail. Too much water, and the fields vanish. A canal must be opened, cleared, watched, measured, and argued over. Grain must be stored. Workers must be organized. Offerings must be brought. Names must be recorded. The gods must be honored. The king must appear necessary. A quirky fringe tidbit often attached to these records claims that the tablets preserve memories of non-human visitors or a vanished pre-human race. That idea wanders far beyond what archaeology can prove. Still, its popularity reveals something interesting about the tablets themselves. They feel older than comfort. They create room for speculation because they speak so confidently about ages no living witness could have seen. And there, carefully, you hold the line between wonder and evidence. The tablets do not prove a technological civilization before humans. They do reveal that the Sumerians imagined a structured world before human society, ruled by powerful beings, organized by decrees, and burdened by labor. That alone is enough to make the room feel colder. In your ears, the reed marsh becomes a kind of breathing. The night deepens. The tablets wait in their cases, brown and quiet, with little wedge marks catching the museum light. They are not loud objects. They do not glitter. They do not perform. Yet they have survived kings, fires, languages, empires, excavators, wars, and glass cabinets. A civilization speaks through them, but not always directly. It gives you accounts of gods before people, work before worship, power before mercy, and memory before history. It does not hand you a clean answer. It hands you fragments. Perhaps that is the proper beginning. Not certainty, not spectacle in only clay, darkness, and the faint impression that human history may have started in the middle of a much older story. Your mind drifts away from the tablet room and settles over a land without pavement, without engines, without the hard white glare of modern lamps. You find yourself in southern Mesopotamia, where the land lies low and wide, beneath a sky so open it almost feels like another sea. The horizon trembles in the heat. The marshes breathe in green and silver. Date palms stand in quiet ranks, their leaves clicking faintly whenever the wind turns. This is not an empty world. It is crowded with water, birds, reeds, insects, fish, mud, and light. Pelicans drift over the channels. Wild cattle move slowly near the bank. The river carries silt from distant mountains, laying down the skin from which fields and settlements will rise. You smell damp earth, crushed reeds, animal hide, smoke, and the faint sweetness of drying dates. Everything feels alive, but not yet fully human. The earliest Sumerian imagination places power in landscapes like this, not in distant heavens alone, but in rivers, storms, clay, seed, salt, and sky. The world is not merely scenery, it is inhabited meaning. A canal is not just a canal. A storm is not only weather. A field is never simply a field. Each thing has a presence behind it, a will, a name, or a hidden command. Archaeological records confirm that southern Mesopotamia became deeply urban during the 4th and 3rd millennia BC, with Uruk expanding into one of the earliest known cities. Research discussed by scholars from Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago places this growth within a world of irrigation, temple households, craft production, and long-distance exchange. The fact is steady and grounded. Cities did not appear from dreams alone. They emerged from mud, management, and labor. Yet the stories imagine an even older arrangement beneath that visible history. The divine powers stand at the beginning, already organized, already possessing authority. They occupy the cosmic offices that humans will later imitate. One governs fresh water, Another holds the sky. Another shapes storms. Another watches the deep places beneath the earth. Another guards grain, birth, writing, or war. It is a system, not a random crowd. For a moment, it feels as though you are walking through a world that has been assigned to unseen officials. The air has ownership. The river has memory. The soil has obligation. Even silence seems to report to someone. You pause beside a channel at dusk. The mud is cool beneath your feet. Frogs call from the reed beds, and the sound comes in soft, uneven pulses. A bird lifts suddenly and disappears into violet light. Far away, thunder mutters without rain. In the Sumerian mind, such a sound could belong to a divine force moving behind the edge of sight. Nature is not dead matter here. Nature is administration. That may sound strange to modern ears, though modern life is not always less strange. You wake beneath invisible networks, obey glowing screens, and trust systems you rarely see. The Sumerians looked at water, wind, hunger, fertility, disease, and harvest, then imagined a chain of command behind them. Honestly, it is not the most unreasonable thing humans have ever done. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that these divine offices preserve memories of an earlier species or ruling class, one that managed Earth like an estate before people became numerous. That claim lives in speculative books and late-night documentaries, usually with dramatic music and too many stars spinning in the background. Archaeology does not confirm such a race, but the idea clings to the texts because the texts describe a world already managed before humans fully enter the stage. This is where the mystery begins to breathe more slowly. The Sumerians were not merely saying that gods existed. Many ancient cultures said that. They were saying that order existed first, that human life entered an already structured reality. The fields, rivers, powers, offices, duties, and sacred rules were not waiting for human invention. They were already there, already weighty, already old. A number of scholars continue to debate whether these traditions reflect priestly theology, inherited environmental memory, or a poetic model for early political power. Some view the divine hierarchy as a mirror of temple bureaucracy. Others suggest that the stories preserve the emotional experience of people living under unpredictable rivers and strict agricultural demands. The debate remains open, and the uncertainty is useful. It keeps the clay from becoming too neat. You walk farther into the marsh. The reeds rise taller than your shoulders, brushing your arms with thin, dry whispers. Mosquitoes hover. The water glints black under the first stars. Somewhere, a fish breaks the surface with a small liquid sound. You can understand why a people born near these marshes imagined creation as something wet, deep, and half-hidden. In Mesopotamian tradition, fresh water has sacred depth. It is not only drink or irrigation, it is the source under the world, the unseen reservoir from which life and wisdom can emerge. You stand near the edge of that idea, listening to the dark water move. It is easy to feel that something could rise from it, a god, a command, a forgotten name, possibly even a memory older than memory. The night air cools, though the heat remains stored in the mud walls of distant huts. Smoke lifts from cooking fires, thin and blue. People are present, but they feel small against the scale of the landscape. Their voices travel only a little way before the marsh swallows them. The stars take their places with terrible calm. The Sumerians did not imagine humans as the first great fact of the world. That is important. In many of their traditions, humans enter a cosmos already filled with divine work, divine tension, and divine ownership. You are not the first voice in the room. You are someone arriving late, noticing that seats have names, duties have rules, and the oldest decisions have already been made. A soft unease follows that thought, because a world arranged before human arrival does not need to explain itself kindly. It may welcome people, it may use them, it may ignore them, it may ask them to keep the canals clear and the offerings steady. You begin to feel the weight of ancient religion not as superstition, but as atmosphere. It is the feeling of living inside someone else's design. Your fingers brush a reed stem, and it bends without breaking. In the distance, a temple platform rises pale against the darkening sky. It is not yet the towering image of later imagination, but it still lifts human eyes upward. It says that earth and heaven must be connected. It says that labor must point somewhere. It says that the invisible order needs a visible house. Perhaps this is why Sumerian sacred places feel so powerful in memory. They stand between swamp and star, between bread and decree, between human sweat and divine command. The temple is not only a place of prayer, it is a warehouse, a workplace, a calendar, a stage, a mouth through which the unseen world speaks. Very convenient for the priests, naturally. Still, convenience and belief can live in the same building. The landscape grows quieter. You sense a world where civilization has not yet become fully human, because the deepest authority belongs elsewhere. The rivers run under old names. The stars keep old patterns. The fields wait for hands that have not yet understood their own purpose. And in that waiting, the hidden timeline opens, long before recorded history, in a time no living memory can reach. The Sumerian stories place a cosmos already alive with rule, burden, desire, and command. It is not empty darkness. It is not peaceful innocence. It is a working world, a watched world, a world with footsteps not quite human pressed into the mud. The heat gathers slowly over the plain, rising from the mud walls and the open fields until even the air seems to carry weight. You stand near the edge of a canal where brown water moves with a tired shine. Men with baskets bend and lift. Women pass jars from hand to hand. A child watches from the shade of a reed screen, blinking against the brightness. Somewhere, a donkey complains with perfect ancient timing, as donkeys have always understood drama. Yet in the old Sumerian imagination, this burden does not begin with human backs. The tablets and later Mesopotamian compositions preserve a startling picture of divine labor. Before humans take up the hoe, before they haul clay, before they sweat beside the canals, certain gods themselves are imagined as workers. They dig, carry, maintain, and endure the rough demands of a young world. This is not the serene heaven of polished statues and distant music. It is a crowded work site beneath an unforgiving sky. You can almost hear it, the scrape of baskets against earth, the slap of wet clay, the breath of tired bodies, the low mutter of complaint moving through a line of workers. In these stories, even the divine order has muscles that ache. The world must be drained, shaped, planted, and fed. Water must be guided through the dry land. Fields must be made from wilderness. Civilization, even before humans, is imagined as effort. Records from early Mesopotamian cities confirm that irrigation agriculture required organization on a large scale. Scholars connected with institutions such as the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania have studied administrative tablets showing rations, labor groups, fields, and temple economies. The mainstream fact is steady and physical. Ancient urban life depended on carefully managed work, especially the movement of water and grain. The mythic record turns that practical truth into a sacred drama. If human cities require labor, perhaps the cosmos itself once required labor. If canals exhaust men, perhaps canals once exhausted gods. The Sumerian mind does not separate economics from the sacred as cleanly as modern people might wish. A work gang and a divine assembly can belong to the same deep pattern. Your gaze follows the canal as it cuts through the land. On one side, green barley bends softly in the wind. On the other, cracked earth waits for water. The difference between hunger and plenty may be only a raised gate, a cleared channel, a decision made at the right hour. In Mesopotamia, water is never just water. It is timing. It is authority. It is survival wearing a shining brown face. The gods who work the earth belong to a story about burdened order. They are not helpless, but they are not carefree. Their power does not protect them from duty. Their senior rulers command from above, while lesser divine figures strain below. The arrangement feels almost political. It has ranks, obligations, resentment, and the slow danger that comes when those beneath the command grow weary. This is where the ancient record becomes quietly unsettling. It suggests that before humanity is created, the world already contains inequality. There are rulers and workers. There are planners and diggers. There are those who decree and those who carry the baskets. The pattern does not begin with human kings. It is imagined as older than humanity itself. That thought lands softly, but it stays. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes claims that the story of gods digging canals records an ancient memory of engineered landscapes built by beings before humans. The idea is tempting to some, because Mesopotamia really was shaped by vast irrigation systems. Yet no excavated canal proves a non-human builder. What the texts do reveal is more subtle, and perhaps more haunting. The Sumerians gave cosmic age to the experience of organized labor. They made exhaustion sacred. You step closer to the workers in your mind, though their faces remain blurred by heat. Their baskets are filled with mud, then emptied, then filled again. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Lift, walk, tip, return, lift, walk, tip, return. At a distance, labor can look orderly. Up close, it is sweat, dust, sore fingers, and flies circling the eyes. In the stories, the divine workers eventually notice the shape of their suffering. That is always dangerous. A burden endured without words can last for a long time. A burden named aloud begins to change. The lesser gods do not simply ache. They understand that they are aching for someone else's design. Scholars continue to debate whether these labor myths preserve social tensions from early temple economies, theological reflections on why humans work, or poetic explanations for the origins of ritual service. Some researchers see them as mythic mirrors of real workforces managed by powerful institutions. Others caution that religious stories do not translate neatly into historical reports. The debate remains open, and the clay keeps its calm little secrets. The temple rises in the distance, its pale surface bright under the sun. Around it, storage rooms hold grain, oil, wool, and tools. Scribes track deliveries, officials assign tasks, priests recite names that make authority feel eternal. This is one of the great accomplishments of civilization, and also one of its old discomforts. It can organize abundance. It can also organize fatigue. You feel the rough handle of a hoe in your palm. The wood has been smoothed by other hands, but it still bites into the skin. The ground resists. Each stroke opens the soil only a little. Above you, the sun does not hurry. It simply watches, bright and indifferent. In Sumerian thought, human work later becomes part of divine maintenance. Offerings feed the gods, temples house them, songs honor them, fields support their households. The line between economy and worship almost disappears. To serve the gods is to keep the world functioning. To keep the world functioning is to serve the gods. A tidy arrangement, especially for anyone collecting grain at the temple door. Still, there is more here than priestly convenience. The stories speak to something older in human life, the knowledge that order costs energy. Bread does not appear because civilization has elegant ideas. It appears because someone bends under the morning heat. Cities do not rise from royal titles alone. They rise from mud mixed with straw, carried one load at a time. The divine workers of the earth reveal an ancient logic. Before people exist as workers, work itself already exists as a cosmic necessity. The universe is not a finished palace. It is a demanding estate, constantly needing repair. Canals clog, fields dry, storehouses empty. Offerings must be renewed. Songs must be sung again. Nothing stays ordered without effort. Your mind settles into the rhythm of this imagined older world. The gods labor not because they are weak, but because creation is heavy. They endure not because they lack power, but because power has made a system that must be maintained. Slowly, quietly. The story turns toward pressure. Pressure in the soil. Pressure in the water. Pressure in the ranks of heaven. You sense that a breaking point is forming beneath the calm surface. Not yet a storm, not yet open revolt, but a low complaint moving through the divine work gangs like heat through clay. The old order is still standing. The canals still run. The rulers still rule from their high places. But the workers are listening to their own weariness. A low sound begins beneath the brightness. Not thunder, not river wind, but the private murmur of beings who have carried too much for too long. You stand in the heat of the plain while the canal bank glows pale and dry. The mud underfoot has cracked at the edges. The baskets are heavy. The work song has faded. Even the flies seem slower, drunk on sunlight and complaint. In the old Mesopotamian accounts, the divine workers do not remain obedient forever. Their exhaustion gathers until it becomes speech, and speech gathers until it becomes refusal. The younger, laboring gods, burdened by digging and maintaining the earth, begin to resist the commands of the higher powers. Their suffering is no longer hidden inside muscle and breath. It becomes a crisis in the very structure of creation. This is not a loud rebellion in the modern sense, with banners, slogans, and someone shouting into a bad microphone. It is older, stranger, and more intimate. It begins with the unbearable repetition of labor. It begins when those who serve realize that service has no end. The canal must be cleared again. The field must be watered again. The earth must be shaped again. Again is the cruelest word in any work site. You hear the scrape of tools stop one by one. Silence spreads across the divine work gangs like shade. The rulers above may still expect movement below, but expectation is not obedience. A god lowers his basket. Another leaves his tool in the mud. Another turns his face toward the place where command comes from. The gesture is small, but in a sacred story, a small refusal can shake the foundations of the world. Cuneiform traditions from Mesopotamia preserve this theme most clearly in later Akkadian versions of the labor revolt, while Sumerian religious ideas help form its older background. Major scholars working through museum collections and university archives have shown that Mesopotamian literature often moves between Sumerian and Akkadian worlds. The mainstream fact is important. These stories belong to a long scribal culture, copied, adapted, and reimagined across centuries. Yet the emotional core remains simple enough to feel in your bones. There is too much work, and someone must answer for it. Your mind moves toward a divine assembly, imagined not as a shining courtroom, but as a tense gathering in thick, warm air. Senior gods sit with authority around them, like heavy clothing. Lesser gods crowd near the edges, restless and tired. The smell of smoke, damp clay, and old offerings hangs in the chamber. No one needs to speak loudly. Everyone already knows the problem has arrived. The fascinating part is that the stories do not erase the complaint. They preserve it. They allow divine workers to become dissatisfied. That means ancient scribes could imagine labor unrest not merely among humans, but at the cosmic level. Rebellion was not only a political danger, it was a mythic possibility, built into the memory of how order first became unstable. A council decree would never say it so beautifully, but the tablets do. Power needs workers. Workers grow tired. Tired workers become dangerous. There you have it. The ancient world's most practical theology, written in clay rather than corporate email. One suspects the gods did not offer many wellness days. The quirky fringe tidbit here is that some modern speculative writers treat this rebellion as evidence of a pre-human industrial class, almost like a lost civilization of divine engineers. The idea runs well beyond what archaeology can support. Still, it points toward the unusual force of the myth. It does not describe a lazy paradise. It describes an organized world facing a labor crisis before humanity exists. That is the hidden turn. Human beings are not created in these traditions because everything is peaceful. They appear because peace has failed among higher powers. They are not introduced into a clean beginning, but into the aftermath of tension. The world has already experienced strain. Authority has already been questioned. Work has already become too heavy. Scholars continue to discuss whether this mythic rebellion reflects real social conditions in temple economies, the emotional burden of corvée labor, or theological reasoning about why humans serve the gods. Researchers at institutions such as Yale and Oxford have long treated Mesopotamian texts as layered compositions, where myth, ritual, and society overlap. The debate remains alive because the stories are too rich for only one explanation. You watch the imagined assembly grow still. Perhaps one of the greater gods listens with irritation. Perhaps another feels fear beneath dignity. Perhaps A wiser voice understands that force alone will not restore order. If the laboring gods are compelled forever, rebellion may return. If their work ceases, the world itself may fall into disorder. The canals cannot clear themselves. The fields cannot plant themselves. The cosmic household is hungry, so a solution must be found, but ancient solutions are rarely gentle. They often satisfy one problem by creating another. In this case, the older order seeks relief for divine workers by imagining a new kind of worker, something lower, more fragile, more numerous, and easier to command, something made from earth, blood, breath, or divine substance, depending on the tradition. Something that can hear orders, carry loads, offer food, and die. You feel the air change. The refusal of the workers is not merely an ending. It is a doorway. The gods stop laboring, and humanity begins to come into view, not yet fully shaped, not yet named in the fields, but already implied by the crisis. The moment a burden is rejected by one class of beings, another class waits to receive it. That is unsettling, because it makes human origin feel less like coronation and more like assignment. The canal water moves slowly past your feet. Its surface holds fragments of sky. You look into it and see no face clearly, only wavering light. That feels appropriate. In these records, humanity is still a reflection forming in disturbed water. The divine world has moved, and the image below begins to tremble. There is a strange sadness in the laboring gods are not villains for wanting rest. The ruling gods are not simple fools for needing the world maintained. The future humans are not guilty because they have not yet arrived. Everyone belongs to a system that demands more than anyone wishes to give. Even creation feels trapped inside necessity. For a moment, it feels almost modern, a world of hierarchy, maintenance, exhaustion, and replacement, a world where those above solve pressure below by moving the weight farther down. The ancient scribes could not know your offices, factories, delivery routes, night shifts, or endless little alerts. Yet the rhythm is recognizable. Someone designs the order. Someone carries the basket. The divine rebellion leaves the old system wounded, but not destroyed. It proves that power alone cannot hold creation together if labor refuses to move. It reveals that the pre-human world, as imagined by Mesopotamia, was not silent perfection. It was a structured order under stress, full of commands, resentment, negotiation, and fear. The sun lowers at last. The heat softens over the canal. Tools lie quiet beside the mud. Somewhere in the gathering dusk, the gods consider what kind of being can carry the work without overturning heaven again. The answer is beginning to form in clay, in blood, in breath, and in the uneasy compassion of tired powers. And the earth waits, patient and dark, for the first human hands. The clay waits beside the water, dark, cool, and ready to remember pressure. You stand near the riverbank as evening thickens over the marsh, and the world seems to hold its breath. The fields are not empty, yet something is missing from them. The canals need hands, the temples need offerings. The old order needs a creature small enough to command, clever enough to serve, and mortal enough to replace without shaking heaven apart. In the Mesopotamian imagination, humanity enters through this uneasy need. The creation of humans is not always told in one single way. The old traditions shift, like water moving through different channels. In some accounts, People are shaped from clay mixed with divine substance. In others, birth goddesses and wise gods take part in the making. The details change, but the central feeling remains. Humanity is fashioned as a response to a cosmic labor problem, and the answer is soft, breathing, vulnerable flesh. You picture a divine workshop, though not one with clean tables and cheerful lamps. It is a shadowed place of damp earth, ritual silence, and difficult choices. The smell of river mud rises heavily. A vessel of water stands nearby. A goddess leans close to the forming clay. A wiser power measures what must be added. Not too much, not too little. The new being must obey, but also understand. It must be humble, but useful. That is a delicate recipe. Records from Mesopotamian literature confirm that clay and divine life are central ingredients in several ancient accounts of human origin. Scholars connected with the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, Yale, and other major centers of cuneiform study have examined these compositions as theology, social memory, and literary art. The mainstream fact is clear. Ancient Mesopotamians repeatedly imagined humans as beings made from earth and connected to divine service. What makes this so powerful is the texture of the idea. Clay is everywhere in southern Mesopotamia. It forms bricks, tablets, bowls, ceilings, ovens, walls, and the very ground underfoot. It can be shaped when wet, hardened by heat, and broken by force. It is humble, but not useless. It is ordinary, but capable of carrying words for thousands of years. A human made from clay is not an insult. It is a truth with fingernails. You raise your hand and imagine wet earth pressed against your palm. It receives every line. It records the smallest ridge of skin. Then it dries and keeps the mark. The metaphor is almost too perfect. People are soft enough to be shaped by command, memory, hunger, fear, love, and ritual. Yet they can harden into habit, culture, pride, and law. In these stories, humanity is made to bear labor that the divine workers no longer wish to carry. That does not mean humans are meaningless. Ancient service is not always humiliation. To serve the gods is also to belong within the world's order. Humans feed divine households, sing hymns, build temples, tend fields, bury the dead, pour beer, burn incense, and keep the names alive. They are workers, yes, but also witnesses. Still, the unease remains, because the first human purpose in this line of thought is not freedom, it is function. The new creature enters history already surrounded by tasks. There are canals to maintain, animals to tend, walls to raise, grain to grind, and offerings to prepare. The sunrise does not ask whether anyone feels inspired. It arrives with work in both hands. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that the mixture of clay and divine substance hints at ancient genetic engineering by advanced beings. This idea appears often in speculative circles, usually with dramatic certainty and very few footnotes. Archaeology does not support that conclusion, yet the myth does speak in a strangely biological language, blending earth with something sacred, as though humans are both natural and borrowed. That is the part that lingers. You are clay, but not only clay. You are earth with a rumor inside it. You are mud that has learned to speak, worry, count, worship, and complain about the weather. The Sumerians and their neighbors gave human life a double identity. People belong to the soil, but they also carry a trace of what stands above them. They are low and exalted at once, which is frankly a very human arrangement. Scholars still debate whether these creation accounts explain temple labor, ritual dependence, the mystery of consciousness, or the social duty of ordinary people within early states. Some read the myths as religious justification for organized service. Others see them as profound reflections on human fragility, mortality, and intelligence. The debate continues because the stories refuse to be only one thing. They are practical and poetic at the same time. You see the first humans in your mind, not as perfect figures glowing in golden light, but as bewildered beings opening their eyes in a world already busy. The air smells of mud, sheep, smoke, and damp grain. The sky is immense. The gods are not distant abstractions. Their houses rise above the settlement. Their names are sung by priests. Their needs shape the calendar. A woman lifts a jar from the ground. A man steps into a canal and feels silt close around his ankles. A child hears a hymn before understanding speech. Life begins not in isolation, but inside duty. The newborn human world is already woven into obligation. And yet there is tenderness here. The same hands made for labor can cradle a sleeping infant. The same mouth made for praise can laugh at a neighbor's stubborn goat. The same back bent beneath baskets can straighten under the stars and wonder why anything exists at all. If humans were created to work, they quickly became more than workers. The clay learned songs that were not strictly necessary. The clay invented stories. The clay looked back at the gods. That may be humanity's quiet rebellion. Not refusal at first, but excess. People do the tasks, then add beauty. They bring offerings, then compose poetry. They build temples, then carve seals with lions, boats, monsters, and impossible creatures. They count barley, then ask where kingship came from before the flood. They serve, but they also remember. The temple courtyard grows dim as lamps are lit. Oil smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of sesame and burnt wick. Someone pours beer into a vessel. Someone else brushes dust from a threshold. Sandals scrape on packed earth. A priest murmurs names with practiced calm, while outside the stars appear one by one. You sense the strange bargain of human creation. The gods gain relief. The world gains workers. The earth gains voices. But with voices come questions, and with memory comes danger. A creature made to serve can also ask why service exists. A creature made from clay can preserve tablets. A creature made mortal can imagine eternity. Perhaps that was not fully planned. In the hidden timeline of the Sumerian records, human beings arrive as the youngest participants in an old drama. The divine order has already known burden. The workers have already resisted. The rulers have already searched for a solution. Now the solution breathes, sweats, fears, desires, and dreams beside the canal. You stand in the soft darkness, listening to the first human settlement settle into night. The doors close, the animals shift, the river moves without hurry. Above the roofs, the temple platform holds the last red trace of sunset. Somewhere in that fading light, a fragile creature made from earth begins to understand that it has been placed inside a story older than itself, and the clay remembers. The night opens over the plain like a dark cloth shaken gently above the earth. You sit beside a small flame while the river murmurs beyond the reeds, and the stars gather in their slow arrangement. A tablet rests near your hand, its surface dry and pale. its signs pressed close together. It does not look dramatic. It looks almost modest, yet within its narrow lines, time stretches until ordinary history begins to feel very small. This is where the Sumerian king list enters the room. It is one of the strangest documents ever inherited from ancient Mesopotamia, not because every line is reliable in a modern sense, but because of what it tries to do. It gathers cities, rulers, reigns, dynasties, and catastrophe into a single chain of memory. Kingship moves from city to city as if it were a sacred object. It descends, rests, departs, and descends again. Power is not merely taken, it is bestowed. The record does something especially unsettling near its beginning. It names rulers who lived before the Great Flood, and it gives them reigns of enormous length. Not decades, not even a few centuries. Tens of thousands of years appear in the tradition, attached to cities whose names carry deep religious weight. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak stand in the pre-flood world like lamps seen through fog. You lean closer to the clay. The numbers resist you. They are too vast for biography, too grand for ordinary memory, too deliberate to dismiss as scribal accident. They do not behave like simple history. They behave like sacred time. The old scribes seem to be telling you that before human kingship became familiar, it belonged to an age of scale beyond normal life. The past expands until your own sense of years loses its edges. Records confirm that copies of the Sumerian king list were preserved in several versions, studied by experts in major museum and university collections. Scholars from institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have treated it as a vital source for early Mesopotamian political imagination. The mainstream fact is secure. The text is ancient, influential, and central to how Mesopotamians organized their view of kingship. Yet the opening reigns are not straightforward history. No archaeologist has found evidence that one early ruler governed for 28,000 years, then politely handed over administration like a patient city clerk. The numbers belong to another kind of truth. They magnify antiquity. They make kingship cosmic. They place rule before the flood, before ordinary measurement, before history feels fully human. That is the power of the list. It does not simply say there were kings. It says kingship itself descended from above. In this worldview, rule begins as something granted by the divine order, not invented by ambitious men with good sandals and sharp elbows. Cities do not merely elect a leader or suffer one into existence. They receive kingship, hold it for a while, then lose it when the sacred pattern moves. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows around these enormous reigns. Some claim the king list preserves exact memories of immortal beings, ancient aliens, or rulers from a lost pre-human civilization. The claim is not supported by archaeology, but the fascination is understandable. The text gives the feeling of a sealed door. Behind it stands a past too large for ordinary explanation, and people naturally begin knocking. You let the idea settle without chasing it too hard. A calmer reading is still deeply mysterious. The king list preserves a memory system in which time before the flood is not normal time. It is inflated, sacred, and remote. The rulers before the catastrophe do not merely precede later kings. They belong to another atmosphere. They are close to the gods, close to origins, close to the first arrangement of power on earth. The fire beside you cracks softly. Sparks rise and vanish. You imagine a scribe copying the list by lamplight, perhaps from an older tablet already worn at the edges. His eyes move across names that are ancient even to him. He knows some cities. He has heard their temple hymns and political claims. But the pre-flood world is not his world. It is ancestral shadow, preserved because kings, priests, and scribes need to know where authority began. The list gives him a ladder into darkness. Each name is a rung. Each city is another landing. The numbers are strange, but strangeness is the point. They tell him that kingship did not begin yesterday, or with his ruler, or with the boasting palace down the road. It began in deep time, when the world was arranged by powers higher than human ambition. Scholars still debate whether the king list served mainly as royal propaganda, theological history, literary construction, or a political attempt to unify competing city traditions. Some researchers emphasize its value as ideology, showing how later rulers claimed legitimacy. Others notice that it preserves older city memories under a single pattern. The debate remains open, because the list is both orderly and impossible. That is a lovely ancient inconvenience. It arranges chaos while keeping wonder alive. It gives sequences but not comfort. It offers names but not faces. It presents time but stretches it beyond recognition. You want it to behave like a history textbook. Instead, it behaves like a ceremonial road leading into mist. The pre-flood kings stand along that road without speaking clearly. Alulim of Eridu, Alalngar of Eridu, and Menluana of Bad Tibira. Names pass like figures seen through reed smoke. Their reigns are immense, their biographies almost absent. This absence is part of their force. They are less like personalities and more like pillars holding up an age. You may wonder what kind of civilization would need such rulers. Not a village with a few huts and a confused goat problem. The list imagines cities, offices, divine sanction, and continuity before the flood. It suggests that order existed in the world before catastrophe divided time, whether mythic, symbolic, political, or all at once. The message is clear. Human society remembers itself as arriving within an already old pattern of rule. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of ash and river grass. Somewhere beyond the darkness, water touches the bank with patient fingers. You feel how easily flood and kingship belong together in this tradition. One gives order, the other erases it. One descends from heaven, the other rises from the deep. Between them lies the fragile ground where humans build. The king list does not describe streets, markets, bedrooms, quarrels, lullabies, or the small daily foolishness that makes people reel. It gives kings and cities instead. Yet behind each name, you can imagine a world of ordinary life spread out beneath impossible numbers. Fires burning, bread baking, boats tied to posts, priests climbing temple stairs, workers clearing canals under a sun that does not care about chronology. If these kings are mythic, they still reveal something historical about imagination. If they are symbolic, they still preserve a memory of sacred authority. If they are political inventions, they still show how deeply Mesopotamians wanted rule to reach beyond one lifetime. A king was strongest when he seemed attached to deep time. Power always enjoys an ancient costume. It looks more respectable that way, and perhaps that is why the pre-flood reigns feel so haunting. They do not prove a hidden civilization in the simple sense. They prove that the Sumerians believed the visible world rested on hidden continuities. Before familiar kings, there were other kings. Before counted years, there were vast years. Before the present city, there were cities swallowed by sacred distance. You look again at the tablet. Small signs, enormous time. The flame lowers. The night becomes cooler. A reed mat rustles behind you as someone turns in sleep. The king list remains awake, carrying its strange sequence through the dark. It does not explain the world before humans with modern clarity. It does something more ancient. It places a crown in the darkness and tells you that rule was already there, waiting, long before memory learned to count like you do. Eridu rises in the mind like a pale shape at the edge of water, half city and half memory. You see it not as a crowded capital roaring with victory, but as an ancient sacred place breathing slowly beside the marsh. The air is warm and faintly salty. Reeds bend in the wind. Birds move over the channels with long, dark wings. The land feels low, damp, and watchful, as though the earth itself is listening from under the mud. In the Sumerian imagination, Eridu is not merely old, it is first. The Sumerian king list places kingship first at Eridu, where rule descends before passing onward through the pre-flood cities. This matters because ancient people did not treat beginnings lightly. A first city carries a different kind of weight. It is not only a settlement, it is a claim about order, origin, and divine favor. If kingship begins there, then Eridu becomes a doorway between the world of gods and the world of human rule. You walk toward its sacred mound in the copper light of evening. The ground is uneven beneath your feet, layered with broken brick, ash, pottery, and centuries of footsteps. Nothing here arrives cleanly. Every surface seems to hide another surface beneath it. A wall stands where an older wall once stood. A shrine rises where an earlier shrine had already turned to memory. Time is stacked in clay. Records confirm that Eridu, known archaeologically at Tel Abu Sharain, contains some of the earliest temple levels in southern Mesopotamia. Excavations revealed a long sequence of sacred buildings, rebuilt again and again over many centuries. Scholars associated with institutions such as the University of Chicago, the University of Pennsylvania, and Oxford have treated Eridu as central to understanding early religious development in Mesopotamia. The mainstream fact is beautifully simple. People return to this place for a very long time. That return gives Eridu its dreamlike force. A temple is built, then another replaces it, then another. Each new foundation honors the same sacred gravity. Generations die, but the spot remains chosen. You can almost hear the soft scrape of baskets as workers bring clay for yet another rebuilding. Not because the old god has moved, but because the house must be renewed. Eridu was especially associated with the god of deep, fresh water, wisdom, craft, and hidden knowledge. In the sacred imagination, this power dwelled in the watery depth beneath the world, the unseen reservoir that nourished creation. The city, therefore, does not stand merely beside marsh water. It stands close to a mystery below things. Its holiness comes from depth, not height. That makes Eridu different from a city of conquest. It does not first enter the story with spears flashing beneath a sunlit wall. It enters through water, wisdom, and foundation. You smell damp clay, fish, reed smoke, and the old sweetness of date syrup warming near a hearth. Somewhere in a courtyard, a priest washes his hands. Somewhere else, a potter turns wet earth into a vessel. The whole city feels made from things that remember touch. A quirky fringe tidbit often attaches itself to Eridu because of its reputation as the first city. Some modern speculative writers claim it was a landing place for divine beings or the headquarters of a pre-human ruling class. The evidence does not prove such claims, yet Eridu's extreme antiquity, sacred status, and link with deep wisdom make it easy for imagination to wander there with a lantern. You do not need the wildest claim to feel the strangeness. The archaeology alone is enough. A sacred place rebuilt through long ages suggests a community returning again and again to the same invisible center. That kind of continuity can feel almost like a message. Not a message written in words, but in foundations. The ground says, "This mattered." The ground says, "They came back." For a moment, it feels as though the first throne is less a chair than a location. Kingship is imagined descending at Eridu, but the city itself seems to receive it through sacred geography. The marsh, the underground waters, the shrine, the god, and the human community form one pattern. Rule begins where wisdom rises from below and command descends from above. A neat arrangement. If one is trying to make power look older than argument, still, there is tenderness in the image. Early Eridu does not have to be imagined as a cruel machine. It may have been a place of fishermen, herders, builders, potters, children, cooks, and ritual specialists trying to make sense of a difficult landscape. The marsh gives fish and reeds. The fields need water. The sky gives heat. The gods demand attention. Survival requires memory, repetition, and trust. Scholars still debate how Eridu's early temples should be understood. Some interpret them as evidence for increasingly organized religious institutions. Others stress that early sacred buildings may have served community identity before later temple economies became more complex. A few discussions focus on whether mythic claims of primacy reflect genuine antiquity, later prestige, or both woven together. The debate remains open, and Eridu keeps its old silence. You step inside an imagined shrine while the light fades outside. The floor is packed clay, cool beneath bare feet. The walls smell of mud plaster and smoke. Offerings sit in modest vessels, not yet buried beneath the grandeur of later empires. A lamp flickers. Its small flame throws huge shadows, making the room seem larger than it is. Here, the first throne does not glitter. It waits. You may expect origin stories to be radiant, but ancient beginnings are often dim. They happen in small rooms, near water jars, among tired people, under roofs that leak. The sacred enters quietly. It is marked by repeated gestures, pouring, washing, placing, naming, returning. Eridu's power lies partly in that repetition. The city becomes first because memory keeps walking back to it. The hidden timeline grows clearer in the dust. Before the great cities boast of walls and armies, there is a sacred center beside the marsh. Before kings become conquerors, kingship is imagined as something entrusted. Before human authority feels purely political, it is placed under the sign of divine depth. Eridu becomes the old hinge, turning between myth and archaeology. You look toward the dark water beyond the settlement. The marsh reflects the first stars, trembling with small ripples. In Sumerian thought, Wisdom does not always shout from the sky. Sometimes it rises from the deep, slow and hidden. That is a useful thing to remember when people speak too confidently about beginnings. The oldest truths are often not on the highest tower. They are underfoot, damp, and difficult to lift. There is also a quiet warning in Eridu. If kingship begins as a gift, then rule is never entirely owned by the ruler. It can be moved. It can be withdrawn. It can pass to another city. The first throne teaches power that it is temporary. Though power has never been famous for enjoying that lesson, even sacred authority carries the seed of departure. Night settles across the mound. The insects grow louder. A coolness rises from the marsh, touching the skin like a hand. You stand among ruined foundations and imagine all the buildings that once rose here, each one replacing another, each one promising permanence with perishable clay. The promise fails. The place remains. Eridu does not answer the mystery completely. It deepens it. It offers a first city where divine wisdom, water, kingship, and human settlement gather into one ancient knot. It suggests that civilization did not begin only with walls, markets, and commands. It began with a sacred location, patiently rebuilt, where people believed the world below and the world above could meet. And somewhere beneath the darkened earth, the first throne seems less like a lost object than a memory still sitting in the clay. The water darkens under the morning sky, and a thin mist rests over the marsh like breath held close to the earth. You stand beside a quiet channel where reeds lean together, whispering in the first light. The mud is cool beneath your feet. A heron lifts one leg with solemn patience, as though it has been appointed to guard the beginning of wisdom. Even the insects seem to pause before the heat arrives. Across the water, a figure appears in the old imagination. He is not quite God, not quite man, not quite animal. He comes from the deep places, bearing knowledge instead of weapons. His shape changes depending on the tradition that remembers him. Sometimes he seems clothed in fish skin. Sometimes he is simply a sage, a teacher, a bringer of order. The later Mesopotamian world will know figures like these as ancient wise ones, culture-bearers who guide humanity toward the arts of civilization. They are often called the seven sages in modern discussions. The number 7 matters in Mesopotamian thought. It carries a feeling of completeness, sacred pattern, and cosmic arrangement. 7 sages before the flood become more than individual teachers. They become a structured memory of instruction, as though humanity did not discover civilization alone, but received it through appointed intermediaries. The idea is gentle and unsettling at the same time. It flatters human learning, but not human independence. You listen to the water tapping softly against a wooden post, somewhere nearby. Fish move beneath the surface with faint silver flashes. The air smells of wet reed, smoke, and the green sourness of marsh plants crushed underfoot. If wisdom were to arrive here, it would not need trumpets. It could come by boat, by dream, by ritual, or by a strange teacher stepping out of the water at dawn. Records confirm that Mesopotamian traditions preserve lists and references to ancient sages associated with the time before the flood. Scholars at major institutions, including Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago, have studied these figures in connection with scribal learning, ritual knowledge, and royal ideology. The mainstream fact is clear. The sages belong to a real ancient tradition about how civilization and sacred knowledge were transmitted. What they bring is not merely clever advice. They are linked with the arts that make a world organized. Writing, ritual, city planning, craft, divination, temple practice, and proper order all gather around their memory. They are not presented as inventors tinkering in a shed, although that would be a charmingly chaotic scene. They are custodians of knowledge with divine approval. Your mind follows one of them through a waking settlement. He passes a place where reeds are bundled for building. He watches a potter shape a vessel on a slow wheel. He enters a courtyard where a child learns to press marks into damp clay. He does not hurry. Wisdom in these stories moves at the pace of instruction, repetition, and apprenticeship. A quirky fringe tidbit has made the sages famous far beyond cuneiform studies. Some modern writers claim the fish-cloaked teacher represents an amphibious visitor from another world, or a survivor from a drowned civilization. Archaeology does not establish that, yet the image is certainly peculiar and memorable. A teacher from the waters, wrapped in the sign of the deep, is not easy to forget. Perhaps that is why the tradition lasts. The sages answer a question that sits quietly behind every early civilization. How did people learn so much so quickly? How did villages become cities? Fields become measured estates? Signs become writing? Rituals become calendars? And chiefs become kings? Modern archaeology explains these changes through long processes of settlement, environment, exchange, administration, and invention. The ancient imagination gives that process a face, not a single face, but 7. Each sage becomes a memory vessel, carrying the idea that knowledge descends into human life through more than ordinary trial and error. A canal can be dug badly many times before it is dug well. A ritual can fail before its right words are fixed. A temple can be placed poorly before a better foundation is chosen. The sages compress such learning into sacred biography. Scholars continue to debate whether these figures represent mythologized priests, ancient scholars, ritual experts, royal advisors, or symbolic beings from the watery realm of wisdom. Some see them as a way for later scribes to claim ancestry from a perfect pre-flood knowledge. Others view them as literary guardians placed between gods and kings. The debate remains open because the sages stand deliberately on a threshold. That threshold is important. They are close enough to humanity to teach, yet distant enough to feel otherworldly. They do not replace human culture. They authorize it. This makes them useful to kings, priests, and scribes, because knowledge becomes more powerful when it appears to come from deep time. A new ritual feels safer if someone can say an ancient sage taught it. A royal court sounds more impressive if its wisdom has a pre-flood pedigree. Ancient branding, really, with better robes. You walk through a schoolroom of the imagination. Young scribes sit with clay tablets on their knees, repeating signs until their wrists ache. The room smells of damp clay, sweat, reed styluses, and old dust. A teacher corrects a mark with dry impatience. Outside, the city hums with animals, traders, servants, and temple workers. Inside, children wrestle with the shapes that will make memory durable. In such a world, the sages are not fantasy decorations. They explain the holiness of learning. Writing is difficult. Ritual is exact. Measurement is powerful. Knowledge can build a city or ruin a field if used badly. To connect learning with ancient semi-divine teachers is to protect it from becoming ordinary. It says, Be careful. These signs are not just marks. These rules are not just habits. The seven sages also reveal a deeper pattern in the hidden timeline. Before humanity becomes fully settled into its own confidence, it receives instruction from beings placed nearer to origins. Human civilization, in this view, is not self-born. It is tutored. It is guided. It is handed tools and rules by figures who remember a world more ancient than the students they teach. The marsh brightens. Sunlight touches the water in small, trembling pieces. You see why the deep matters here? Water hides what it carries. It reflects the sky while concealing fish, roots, silt, and old things dropped from boats. Wisdom behaves the same way in these traditions. It appears on the surface as instruction, but its source lies underneath, in places ordinary eyes cannot search. A priest may know the ritual words, but who first taught them a king may command a city. But who first shaped kingship, a scribe may copy a tablet, but who first pressed speech into clay. The sages stand in the gap created by such questions. They do not answer like modern history. They answer like mythic memory, with figures walking out of the deep. There is a calm strangeness in that image. Humanity is young, noisy, and practical, worrying about grain, walls, children, animals, and weather. Then come these older teachers, carrying measured wisdom into the confusion. They do not remove hardship. The canals still clog. The fields still demand sweat. The temples still require offerings. But they give form to the work. And form is one of civilization's quiet miracles. By midday, the mist has vanished. Heat lifts from the mud walls. The reed beds shine harshly under the sun. The teacher from the waters is gone, or perhaps only unseen. Yet the marks remain on clay. The rituals remain in memory. The city remains arranged around inherited knowledge. And you are left with a soft, uneasy thought. Perhaps civilization did not begin when humans first built walls. Perhaps it began when someone older, stranger, or simply more remembered taught people how to make the walls mean something. The air grows heavier as the pre-flood world fills with sound. You stand in a city where the streets are narrow, the walls are sun-baked, and the roofs hold the last gold of evening. Somewhere, grain is being poured into storage jars with a soft, rushing sound. Somewhere else, a copper tool rings against stone. Goats complain in doorways. Children chase one another past reed baskets, already dusty, already loud, already wonderfully inconvenient. This is no empty, sacred landscape anymore. The world before the deluge becomes a place of kingship, ritual, work, appetite, ambition, and noise. The old stories place power in cities, and cities are never quiet for long. They breathe through doors, ovens, courtyards, workshops, shrines, and market lanes. They gather human need until it becomes almost musical. Bread, beer, wool, fish, dates, bricks, water, smoke, and prayer all move together. In Mesopotamian tradition, the pre-flood age is not merely a vague paradise. It is organized. Kings rule, cities hold authority, temples receive offerings, people, or beings like people, live within a system older than the remembered world. The divine order has already descended into civic form, and the city becomes the instrument through which heaven touches mud. You walk under a low doorway into a courtyard where women grind grain by hand. The stone moves back and forth with a steady rasp. Flour dust clings to their fingers and hair. A pot steams nearby. thick with the smell of barley and onions. Beyond the courtyard, a scribe crouches beside a tablet, counting deliveries with the calm seriousness of someone who knows numbers can frighten even powerful men. Records confirm that early Mesopotamian cities depended on temple institutions, accounting systems, craft specialists, and controlled food distribution. Research associated with the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Chicago, Oxford, and other major centers has examined tablets and excavations showing complex urban organization. The mainstream fact is firm. The cities of southern Mesopotamia were not simple clusters of huts. They were managed, layered, and economically sophisticated. The mythic pre-flood cities magnify that sophistication into sacred antiquity. When the king list names cities before the flood, it creates the impression of an early world already equipped with rule and structure. This doesn't mean every pre-flood detail is literal. It means that ancient scribes imagined civilization as something with roots buried far deeper than ordinary memory. Cities did not merely appear. They inherited a burden. That burden may be order itself. The world before the flood grows crowded with obligation. Offerings must be made. Canals must be maintained. Names must be remembered. Kings must rule under divine sanction. Priests must perform rituals correctly, because mistakes in sacred matters are rarely treated as charming little accidents. The cosmic pattern depends on repetition. Each day must resemble the day before, or everything begins to tremble. For a moment, it feels as though the city is a loom. Every person is a thread, pulled through work, hunger, worship, duty, and sleep. The gods sit above the pattern. The king holds part of the frame. The temple ties the knots. The result is civilization, beautiful from a distance and exhausting up close. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that pre-flood cities in Mesopotamian tradition were remnants of an advanced lost age, with knowledge later scattered after catastrophe. This idea appears often in fringe histories because the flood boundary feels like a broken bridge. Archaeology does not confirm a vanished advanced civilization of that kind. Yet the tradition does preserve the powerful belief that an earlier ordered world existed and was violently interrupted. That interruption is important because the pre-flood age is not described only to impress you with antiquity. It is described so that it can be lost. A world must first be structured before its destruction becomes meaningful. A flood washing over empty mud is a weather event. A flood washing over kingship, temples, cities, rituals, and memory becomes a cosmic rupture. You hear drums in the distance, soft and slow from a temple precinct. The sound enters the street like a heartbeat. People turn slightly toward it without stopping their tasks. Religion here is not separated from daily life by polite modern categories. It flows into storage rooms, fields, marriages, oaths, meals, and royal claims. The sacred is practical. The practical is sacred. Very efficient and slightly oppressive, which is often civilization's favorite combination. Scholars continue to debate whether the pre-flood traditions encode memories of real floods in southern Mesopotamia, literary patterns shared across ancient Near Eastern cultures, or theological reflections on why civilizations fail. Some researchers compare flood deposits and settlement changes. Others focus on the way scribes used catastrophe to divide mythic time from historical time. The discussion remains unresolved because water leaves mud. But memory leaves stories. You move through the city as night lowers. Oil lamps begin to glow in small doorways. The scent of sesame oil and smoke mixes with animal dung, damp clay, and warm bread. A man checks the rope on a tethered donkey. A woman lifts a sleeping child from the threshold. A priest closes the door of a shrine. The sounds become softer, but they do not vanish. This is what makes the pre-flood world feel alive. It is not only kings with impossible reigns, it is all the small lives beneath those reigns, imagined or remembered, real or symbolic. Someone sharpens a blade. Someone spills beer and curses softly. Someone worries about debt. Someone looks at the sky and wonders why the clouds have gathered in a strange way near the horizon. The ancient stories sometimes suggest that the world becomes too loud, too crowded, or too troubling for the divine powers. Later, flood traditions speak of human noise disturbing the gods, a detail both amusing and chilling. Humanity survives its creation, multiplies, and becomes inconvenient. Apparently, the gods wanted servants, not a neighborhood association meeting that never ends. Yet beneath the gentle sarcasm lies a serious thought. Civilization creates noise in every sense. It creates literal sound, but also conflict, desire, rivalry, ritual demand, and moral disorder. As cities grow, the system that once solved divine labor may create new divine irritation. The solution becomes a problem. The clay workers become voices. The voices become many. You stand at the edge of a roof and look over the city. Flat rooftops stretch toward the dark. Smoke threads upward. The temple platform rises above the houses, catching moonlight along one pale side. Beyond the walls, the fields lie black and wet, cut by canals that shine faintly under the stars. Everything appears stable. Everything appears held. But ancient stories rarely linger on stability unless it is beginning to crack. The world before the deluge carries the beauty of order and the threat of excess. Kingship has descended, but kingship can fail. Rituals are performed, but rituals can lose balance. Cities gather life, but they also gather tension. The divine system that shaped humanity now faces humanity's multiplying presence, and the old watchers begin to notice. A breeze moves over the roof, cool against your face. It brings the smell of distant water, not the friendly scent of irrigation channels, but a wider wetness, deep and approaching. You cannot see the storm yet. The people below cannot see it either. They are closing jars, banking fires, settling animals, whispering beside doorways, laughing in courtyards, counting tomorrow's work. The pre-flood world continues under the stars, busy and confident, as every world feels before it learns how fragile it has always been. The first warning does not arrive as a shout. It comes softly, like water touching reeds in the dark, like a small sound heard just before sleep takes hold. You are inside a city near the river, where night has lowered itself over roofs, courtyards, animals, and quiet clay walls. The heat of the day still lingers in the bricks. A lamp flickers beside a bed. Smoke from its wick curls upward, thin and blue. Somewhere, a man dreams. In Mesopotamian flood tradition, the warning of destruction is not given openly to every street and doorway. It passes through secrecy, through a god's careful speech, through a barrier, through a dream, or through words addressed to a wall of reeds. The message is strange, almost indirect. as though the divine world cannot quite say what it means in the usual way. Catastrophe approaches, but knowledge of it arrives sideways. That sideways quality gives the story its haunted calm. You imagine the sleeping man turning under a woven covering. Outside, the city murmurs in fragments. A dog scratches near a threshold. A donkey shifts and sighs. Water insects flicker around the last lamps. The sky above the flat roofs is thick with stars, yet those stars give no warning ordinary eyes can read. The danger is not written in bright letters overhead. It is hidden in a private message. Records from ancient Mesopotamian literature confirm that flood stories circulated in Sumerian and Akkadian forms, including accounts where a chosen figure receives instructions to survive a coming deluge. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these texts as part of a wider ancient Near Eastern tradition. The mainstream fact is clear. The Mesopotamian flood story is not a late curiosity. It belongs to the deep archive of ancient writing. The warning itself is practical, not merely poetic. Build, seal, gather, prepare. Leave behind the assumption that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. This is the terror of prophecy in its oldest form. It does not only reveal the future, it changes the present. Once the warning is heard, ordinary life becomes impossible to trust. You stand near a reed wall in the dimness. Its woven surface smells of dust, marsh grass, and human sleep. A voice seems to move through it, low enough that even the night must lean closer. It speaks not to a crowd, but to the one person placed at the narrow gate between ending and survival. The instruction is intimate. The consequence is vast. The contrast is unsettling. A whole world is about to be erased, yet the warning may reach only one house. A city full of ovens, cradles, debts, jokes, songs, and stubborn relatives continues breathing around the secret. People close their doors. They count jars. They scold children. They scratch mosquito bites. They worry about grain prices, because humanity has always found a way to worry about grain prices, even near the edge of cosmic disaster. A quirky fringe tidbit suggests that the hidden warning represents encrypted knowledge from an earlier civilization, passed to a survivor who preserved advanced science after the flood. Archaeology does not establish this idea, yet it grows from a real feature of the story. The survivor is not saved by strength. He is saved by information. Knowledge becomes the vessel before the vessel is built. You feel the quiet force of that. In these traditions, survival begins with hearing correctly. Not everyone hears, not everyone believes, not everyone understands that the old order has already been judged. The chosen figure is not merely lucky, he is receptive. He listens when the warning comes wrapped in strangeness. Scholars continued to debate whether the Mesopotamian flood traditions reflect memories of regional river floods, theological reflections on divine decision-making, or literary patterns about renewal after destruction. Some researchers point to real flood layers found at certain ancient sites, though these do not show one universal event. Others focus on the story's moral and ritual meaning. The debate remains alive because the flood is both mud and metaphor. Inside the warning, there is a moral difficulty. Why save one and not all? Why whisper instead of proclaiming from the sky? Why allow a city to sleep beneath approaching water? Ancient texts do not always soothe such questions. They leave them in the room, sitting quietly beside the lamp. You may look at them for a while. They will not blink first. Perhaps the hidden warning suggests that divine order itself is divided. One power decrees destruction, while another preserves a remnant. The gods are not shown as a single simple will. They argue, conceal, regret, and maneuver. This gives the story emotional depth. It also makes the universe feel less comfortable. If heaven disagrees with itself, earth must live inside that disagreement. You hear wood creak in the dreamer's house. His eyes open. For a moment, he does not move. The dream remains around him like a second darkness. Then fear enters slowly, not as panic, but as recognition. Something has been told to him that cannot be untold. The city is still sleeping, yet his world has already ended. The instructions begin to take shape in his mind. A boat must be built, though the land still looks ordinary. Pitch must seal its seams, family must be gathered, animals, craftsmen, stores, and precious things must be brought aboard, depending on the version remembered. Such preparations will look foolish to neighbors. That is one of catastrophe's little cruelties. The prepared person often appears ridiculous until it is too late. The scent of bitumen rises in the imagination, sharp and heavy. Men heat it until it softens. It clings to wood and reed, black and shining. Hands become stained. Clothing absorbs the smell. The vessel forms not in heroic brightness, but in labor, confusion, secrecy, and perhaps embarrassment. Someone surely asks whether a normal hobby might have been less expensive. Yet the building continues. The warning spreads into action, and action becomes a fragile arc of memory. Each board, each reed bundle, each sealed seam answers the dream. The future is being made against the evidence of the present. The sky is calm, the streets are dry, the river remains within its banks. Still, the vessel grows. This is the strange center of the tale. Disaster is still invisible, but obedience has already begun. The old world continues around the survivor, while a new world is quietly prepared inside it. There is no great trumpet, no public explanation, no final city meeting where everyone receives helpful pamphlets. There is only hidden knowledge moving through one life into wood, pitch, and fear. You stand outside as dawn begins to pale the eastern sky. Roosters call. Smoke rises from breakfast fires. The city wakes with no understanding of what has shifted in the night. Bakers knead dough. Children rub their eyes. Workers move toward canals with tools on their shoulders. Priests open temple doors. The ordinary morning returns with heartbreaking confidence. But somewhere near the edge of the settlement, the warned man has already stepped outside ordinary time. He carries a secret heavier than any basket of clay. He knows that the world can end while people are still planning supper. He knows that memory may soon need a hull, and the reeds whisper as the water waits. The first rain seems almost harmless. It taps on reed roofs, darkens the dust, and gathers in shallow hollows beside the walls. You stand beneath a low shelter, watching drops stitch small rings across the courtyard mud. People look upward with mild annoyance, perhaps even relief. Rain can be a blessing in a land where water gives bread its beginning. A little rain belongs to life. Then the rhythm changes. The drops become harder. The sky lowers. The air tightens until every breath tastes of wet clay. Smoke and fear. Thunder moves across the plain, not as one sharp crash, but as a long body rolling in darkness. The river, which yesterday seemed familiar, begins to speak with another voice. Its surface rises against the banks. Its brown strength presses outward, patient and immense. In the Mesopotamian flood traditions, the end of the pre-flood world comes through water, storm, and divine decision. The catastrophe is not only a natural event, it is a judgment, a cleansing, a rupture in time. The old cities, kings, rituals, fields, and sleeping households fall beneath a force that human walls cannot argue with. The world that seemed organized becomes fluid again. You hear shouting from the lanes. A man calls for his animals. A woman pulls a child close under a cloak. Doors open and slam. Grain jars are lifted onto higher shelves, as though shelves can negotiate with the end of an age. The smell of rain mixes with dung, lamp smoke, frightened bodies, and the bitter scent of wet plaster. Sandals slap through mud. Someone curses the roof. Someone prays louder than necessary. The flood story preserved in Mesopotamian literature became one of the most influential catastrophe traditions in the ancient world. Major museum collections and university research programs, including work connected with the British Museum, Yale, Oxford, and American cuneiform scholarship, have treated these tablets as crucial evidence for early ideas about destruction and renewal. The mainstream fact is steady. The Mesopotamian flood account stands among humanity's oldest written stories of world-ending water. Yet the tablets do not reduce the flood to weather. They make it cosmic. The storm is not merely falling from above. The deep seems to open from below. Waters join across boundaries that normally keep creation stable. Sky and earth lose their old agreement. The ordered world softens, breaks, and returns to the formless power from which life once emerged. That is the terrible poetry of it. Water creates the fields, but water also erases them. Water carries boats, but water can lift them over rooftops. Water fills canals by human design, then ignores every boundary human hands have drawn. The same element that made civilization possible becomes the element that proves civilization temporary. Ancient Mesopotamia understood this with a clarity no dry philosophy could improve. A quirky fringe tidbit claims the flood was a global reset that erased a technologically advanced civilization before ordinary humans inherited scattered fragments of its wisdom. Archaeology does not confirm such a lost machine age. Still, the idea clings to the story because the flood feels like more than damage. It feels like memory being cut in two. You look toward the vessel built in secrecy. It groans against the rising water, dark with pitch, crowded with breath, wood, fear, and urgent hands. The survivor and those gathered with him cross a threshold that no one can cross twice. Behind them is the city. Before them is water without streets. The old map dissolves beneath them. The door closes. Outside, the storm continues. The shortness of that moment is almost unbearable. A closed door is a simple thing, a piece of wood, a seal, a boundary. Yet in the story, it separates memory from oblivion. On one side, the remnant; on the other, the world that will become silt, silence, and fragments. Scholars continue to debate how much the flood traditions preserve memories of severe regional flooding in Mesopotamia, how much they belong to older mythic patterns, and how scribes use them to explain the renewal of kingship. Some point toward excavated flood layers at ancient sites, though these layers differ in date and scale. Others emphasize literary structure and theology. The debate remains unresolved, and perhaps it should remain careful. The storm does not care about debates. It climbs the walls. It fills courtyards. It takes baskets, stools, roof beams, and the small objects that make a household feel permanent. A child's toy of baked clay vanishes beneath brown water. A storage jar tips and rolls away. The painted edge of a shrine disappears. The city becomes a pattern under the surface. Then, not even that. You feel the vessel lift. At first, it shudders like an animal resisting sleep. Then the ground lets go. The familiar weight of earth beneath the feet is replaced by motion. The boat rises on water that has swallowed roads, fields, thresholds, and names inside. People listen to the storm strike the hull. Animals shift in darkness. Someone vomits from fear or movement. Someone whispers a prayer until the words lose shape. There is no heroic music here. There is only enclosure, darkness, and survival that does not yet feel like mercy. The air inside is thick with pitch, wool, breath, grain, wet wood, and animal heat. Every sound is too close. Every silence is worse. The saved do not yet know what kind of world remains. They only know the old one is being taken from them. In some traditions, even the gods grow afraid of the flood's violence. This is an extraordinary detail. Powers that decreed destruction may recoil from its scale, like rulers discovering too late that commands become real in the bodies of others. The story allows divine regret to enter the storm. That does not undo the water, but it makes the tragedy deeper. Perhaps this is why the flood never feels like a simple punishment. It feels excessive, fearful, and mourned even by those who permitted it. The old system has failed, but its ending is not clean. Nothing about mass erasure can be clean. The flood washes, but it also stains memory forever. You watch days lose their names inside rain. There is no mourning in the usual sense, only dimness becoming slightly less dim. There is no evening, only darkness thickening around the same fear. The boat moves over a world without landmarks. Hills, houses, fields, and temple platforms vanish beneath one restless skin of water. The sky and the deep seem to have become one substance. The hidden timeline breaks here. Before the flood, kingship stretched backward into impossible reigns, sacred cities, appointed sages, and a world where divine order pressed heavily upon earth. During the flood, that sequence is cut. The tablets do not let the older age continue comfortably into later history. They place a watery wound between what was and what can be remembered. That wound matters more than any single number. It tells you that civilization is not guaranteed by age, wisdom, kings, temples, or divine origin. A world can be ancient and still end. A system can be sacred and still collapse. A city can be first, powerful, and beloved, then become mud beneath another layer of mud. At last, the rain begins to soften. The pounding lessens into a weary hiss. The vessel drifts in a silence so complete it feels unnatural. No market cry, no grinding stone, no temple drum, no donkey performing its ancient public complaints. Only water touching wood, and breath returning cautiously to those who have survived. You stand within that silence and understand why the story endured. It is not only about death, it is about the terrifying gap after an ending, when survival has happened, but meaning has not yet returned. The old world lies below. The new one has not yet spoken. Between them floats a sealed memory, waiting for dry ground. And beneath the quiet water, The erased civilization becomes a secret held in clay, silt, and the sleep of drowned names. The waters fall without celebration. They lower themselves from walls, trees, mounds, and broken roofs, leaving behind a skin of mud that shines in the dull morning light. You stand on ground that does not yet trust itself. It pulls at the feet. It smells of silt, wet wood, dead reeds, opened earth, and the sour breath of things uncovered too suddenly. The sky is pale, washed clean, and almost empty. Silence has changed its shape. The silence before disaster is full of ordinary life waiting to resume. This silence is different. It has no promise inside it yet. It lies across the plain where streets have lost their edges, fields have lost their boundaries, and houses have become low shapes beneath the mud. A jar neck sticks out of the ground. A roof beam lies twisted among reeds. A broken seal impression rests near your foot, its owner unnamed. The surviving vessel has come to rest somewhere beyond the familiar map. The ancient accounts place the remnant at the edge of a world made raw again. The water has withdrawn, but it has not returned what it took. It leaves deposits, fragments, and difficult mercy. Survival is present, yes. Comfort is not. You breathe carefully. In Mesopotamian tradition, the end of the flood does not simply restore normal life. It begins the problem of return. Food must be offered. The gods must be approached. The living must learn whether the divine powers still accept them. The earth must be inhabited again, although it now feels like a place that has revealed its violence. The survivor steps out, not as a triumphant hero, but as someone who carries the weight of memory. Records confirm that Mesopotamian flood stories include sacrifice after survival, followed by renewed arrangements between gods and humanity. Scholars from major universities and museum collections have studied these scenes as part of ancient reflections on catastrophe, ritual, and social renewal. The mainstream fact is clear enough. The story does not end with escape. It moves toward rebuilding order through offerings, decisions, and changed relationships. You see smoke rising in the washed air. A small fire is made on damp ground. It resists at first, coughing and smoking, then catches with fragile warmth. Something is offered, not because abundance has returned, but because relationship must be restored. The scent rises, fat, grain, smoke, perhaps cedar or reed, carried upward through air still smelling of flood water. In the story, the gods gather around the offering. Hunger, regret, relief, and anger move through the divine assembly. That detail feels almost uncomfortable. The gods who sent destruction are also drawn by the smell of sacrifice. It is a reminder that the old system has not vanished. It has been wounded, frightened, and rearranged, but it still exists. Humanity survives, and divine need survives with it. The relationship continues, although it can no longer be innocent. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that the survivor's sacrifice marks the restart of civilization under strict control by beings who preserved selected humans. The archaeological evidence does not support such a literal management program. Still, the story does imagine survival as selective, fragile, and dependent on instructions from powers beyond ordinary human reach. That alone gives it a faintly unsettling aftertaste. You walk across the mud where a field once lay. Your foot presses down, and water seeps into the print. A few stalks of broken barley lie flat, pointing in the same direction as the retreating current. The irrigation banks are ruined. The channels are clogged. The careful human lines drawn across the earth have been blurred by one overwhelming hand. The world must be measured again. This is where civilization begins, not as discovery, but as repair. Someone must clear the canals. Someone must find seed grain. Someone must gather surviving animals. Someone must mark where a house can stand without sinking. Someone must remember the names of the dead, or decide which names can no longer be carried. The New World is not new because it is clean. It is new because it has lost too much. Scholars continue to debate how the flood boundary functioned in Mesopotamian thought. Some view it as a mythic separation between remote sacred time and more ordinary dynastic memory. Others see it as a way to explain the vulnerability of cities built on floodplains. Still others study how later scribes used catastrophe to reset kingship and divine order. The discussion remains open, because the flood is both story and structure. You notice how kingship returns. In the king list tradition, after the flood has swept over the land, kingship descends again. The phrase carries enormous weight. It means rule was not invented from human panic alone. It comes back as a sacred institution, renewed from above, yet marked by interruption. The chain resumes, but it resumes on the far side of erasure. The first post-flood cities do not feel the same as the older ones. They inherit absence. Their rulers stand in light cast by vanished rains. Their temples rise on earth that has been soaked in warning. Their scribes copy traditions that insist an earlier order existed and that it ended. Every rebuilt wall becomes an argument against water. Every stored jar becomes a little act of defiance. Every child born becomes a soft refusal to let the story sink. You enter a settlement beginning again. The sounds return slowly. A hammer taps, a sheep bleats. A woman calls across a courtyard. A potter kneads clay with his heels, working out stones from the wet mass. Smoke rises from ovens that smell of damp fuel and stubborn hope. No one has time to be poetic about resilience. There is too much mud to move. Still, something has altered beneath the practical tasks. The living know that order can vanish. They know that divine favor can become divine danger. They know that memory can be broken into a before and a now. Even when daily life resumes, the flood remains behind every wall like a second foundation. Perhaps this is why ancient Mesopotamian civilization became so devoted to writing lists, rituals, and precise administration. That is not the only reason, of course. Grain does not count itself, and officials have always enjoyed making other people stand in lines. Yet beneath the practical need, there is a deeper human impulse. To write is to resist disappearance. To list kings is to stretch memory across a wound. To rebuild a temple is to tell the waters they did not have the final word. The post-flood world also changes the place of humanity. Humans are still servants of the gods, still tied to offerings, work, kingship, and ritual. But now they are survivors too. They carry a terrible knowledge the first laborers did not have. They know the system can end them. They know the gods may regret, quarrel, spare, and destroy. They know existence is not secured by obedience alone. That knowledge makes them smaller and larger at the same time. You stand at dusk as the first stars return over the damp plain. The sky looks unchanged, which is almost insulting. The river slips between its banks again with innocent movement. Frogs begin calling from the marshes as though nothing important has happened. Nature is extremely good at seeming calm after catastrophe. It does not apologize. Near a new fire, someone tells the story aloud, not all of it, perhaps not with every name, but enough. A great flood came, a warning was given, a vessel survived, the waters fell, the world began again. The listeners hear it, not as entertainment, but as inheritance. They are being taught that beneath their fields lies an older silence, and beneath their kingship lies a broken crown. The washed earth cools beneath the night. The mud begins to firm. Tomorrow, hands will lift tools again. Seeds will be sorted. Bricks will be shaped. A city will grow where emptiness still smells of water. And in the returning order, the earlier civilization becomes distant, half-remembered, and quietly forbidden by the depth that covers it. The damaged tablet rests under soft museum light, quiet as a sleeping animal. You stand before it and notice first what is missing. A corner has broken away. A line vanishes into a scar. A name begins clearly, then falls into a wound in the clay. Time has not simply preserved the record. Time has edited it, and time is not a careful editor. The old scribes pressed signs into damp earth with patient skill, yet they could not protect every word from fire, water, war, salt, careless hands, and the long appetite of centuries. The result is not a complete confession from the ancient world. It is a whisper interrupted by damage. You lean close, hoping the gaps will open. They do not. They remain gaps. This is where the mystery becomes more serious. The tablets do not refuse to speak because they are empty. They refuse because they are partial. They give enough to unsettle you, then withhold the rest. They name divine orders, ancient kings, pre-flood cities, culture-bearers, warnings, and catastrophe. Then they break at the exact place where certainty would be most convenient. Ancient history has a dark sense of humor. It always loses the line you most wanted. Records from major cuneiform collections confirm that many Mesopotamian texts survive in multiple copies. Fragments, translations, school exercises, and later adaptations. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Chicago often reconstruct compositions by comparing broken tablets from different sites and periods. The mainstream fact is simple, but humbling. What survives is not the whole library of Sumerian memory. You breathe in the faint smell of dust, stone and polished floors. The museum is clean, controlled, and cool. But the tablet carries another climate inside it: heat, mud, smoke, fingers, a reed stylus, a scribe bending low while flies gather near the lamp. The object in front of you belongs to both worlds, the ancient room where it was made, and the modern room where it is studied. That double life creates uncertainty. A tablet may preserve an old tradition, but the copy itself may be much later. A story may have Sumerian roots, yet survive in Akkadian form. A royal list may organize memory, but also reshape it for political purpose. A myth may contain social truth without offering literal chronology. The clay speaks, yes, but always through layers. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that missing tablet lines hide deliberate suppression, as if ancient priests removed proof of a pre-human civilization from history. There is no solid evidence for that dramatic picture. Still, the feeling of concealment arises naturally when a broken record mentions impossible rains, divine workers, and a vanished world before the flood. Damage looks like secrecy when imagination stands too close. You do not need conspiracy to feel the unease. Ordinary loss is powerful enough. A broken tablet can create more mystery than a sealed archive, because it leaves the mind to wander inside the missing space. What stood there? A name, a number, a phrase explaining everything, or only a boring note about barley, which would be painfully on brand for Mesopotamia. Even that possibility has its charm. History is often rescued by accountants. The scholarly debate turns carefully around these silences. Some experts read the pre-human and pre-flood material as religious myth shaped by temple theology. Some emphasize political ideology, especially the need to place kingship under divine authority. Others explore memories of environmental crisis, floods, urban growth, and social strain preserved in mythic form. The disagreement does not weaken the texts. It reveals their depth. You look again at the missing lines. They remind you that ancient records are not windows opened cleanly onto the past. They are more like lamps carried through fog. They light certain shapes and leave others in shadow. Eridu appears, the flood appears, kingship descends, the gods labor, humans are made, sages teach, water erases, but the exact meaning of the whole pattern remains just beyond reach. Perhaps that is why the tablets have survived not only as evidence, but as invitation. They ask you to reconstruct, but they punish arrogance. They reward attention, but not certainty. A historian must follow grammar, stratigraphy, context, comparison, and caution. A storyteller must follow atmosphere, rhythm, and human fear. Between them, the ancient world begins to breathe, though never entirely in the open. Your fingers do not touch the glass. Still, you imagine the clay's surface beneath your skin. It would feel dry, faintly rough, and lighter than its burden. Each wedge mark is a decision made by a hand that is gone. That hand did not write for modern theories, late-night speculation, or comfortable documentaries. It wrote within a living system of temples, rulers, schools, and gods. Its world was not trying to be mysterious. It was trying to remain ordered. That is an important thought. Ancient people did not experience themselves as clues. They had debts, meals, fevers, rivalries, jokes, rituals, and bad mornings. Their scribes copied inherited texts for reasons both sacred and practical. The mystery grows because we stand far away, with broken evidence and hungry questions. Distance turns daily order into shadow, yet some shadows are real. The tablets reveal a civilization deeply concerned with what came before ordinary human memory. They place humanity within a prior order of divine command, labor, revolt, creation, instruction, kingship, and destruction. They do not present humans as the first or only actors in the cosmic story. They place us late, small, useful, noisy, and strangely precious. The unsettling part is not that the tablets prove a forgotten race before humans. They do not prove that. The unsettling part is that the Sumerians imagined history itself as a surface laid over older depths. Beneath the present city lies an earlier city. Beneath the king lies kingship. Beneath human work lies divine labor. Beneath the known world lies water. Beneath memory lies a flood. The exhibit room grows quieter. A visitor steps away. A guard shifts in his chair. Light reflects softly on glass. Beyond the walls, modern traffic moves with its endless restless breathing, unaware that a small clay tablet is still rearranging time for anyone patient enough to listen. You begin to understand what the tablets refuse to say. They refuse to flatten themselves into one answer. They refuse to become only myth, only history, only politics, or only fantasy. They refuse the modern demand that the past explain itself quickly. Instead, they offer fragments of a larger hidden story, then leave you with the responsibility of humility. Perhaps memory itself was reshaped by the flood traditions. Perhaps later scribes arranged older materials into patterns that made kingship legitimate and catastrophe meaningful. Perhaps environmental trauma became sacred story. Perhaps myth preserved something about civilization's fear of its own beginnings. These are not failures of certainty. They are careful doors left open. The clay remains still. In that stillness, you sense the oldest truth the tablets may offer. Human history is not a straight road from darkness to light. It is a layered mound, built from mud, loss, rebuilding, and remembered fear. Each generation writes over another, but the earlier marks never fully disappear. They press upward faintly, like buried signs under new clay, and perhaps the silence is part of the record, holding what the tablets cannot say, and what the ancient scribes never meant to give away. The last tablet does not close the mystery, it leaves it open, like a doorway in a room where the lamp has almost burned out. You stand again in the quiet presence of clay, water, stars, and remembered kings, feeling how the oldest story refuses to become simple. The Sumerian records do not hand you a neat secret wrapped in certainty. They give you something older, slower, and more difficult to hold. They give you a human beginning that is not really a beginning. In these ancient accounts, humanity arrives inside a world already filled with authority, labor, hierarchy, sacred geography, and cosmic tension. The gods have ruled. The earth has been worked. The waters have hidden wisdom. The first cities have received kingship. The sages have carried instruction. The flood has divided time. By the time humans look fully awake in the story, the stage is already marked by footprints that are not entirely theirs. That is the quiet disturbance at the heart of it. You walk in imagination across a low mound at dusk. Broken pottery crunches softly underfoot. The air smells of dust, dry grass, and faint marsh wind from somewhere beyond sight. A shard of brick lies half buried near your sandal. It is not impressive. No tourist would gasp at it, yet it may have belonged to a wall, a shrine, a house, or a storeroom where someone once counted grain beneath a tired sun. Records confirm that the earliest civilizations of southern Mesopotamia developed through long processes of settlement, irrigation, writing, temple organization, and political competition. Research by major universities and museums has shown how real cities grew from real communities across centuries. The mainstream fact remains essential. Sumerian civilization was human, material, and archaeological, built from clay, grain, labor, and memory. But the Sumerians explained that human world through stories that reached beyond ordinary human time. They did not merely ask how cities functioned. They asked why kingship existed at all. They asked why humans worked. They asked why the gods needed offerings. They asked why catastrophe could erase order. Their answers were written in myth. But myth is not the opposite of truth. It is one of humanity's oldest ways of carrying difficult truths without crushing them. You feel the wind move over the mound. It passes through grass, over baked brick, and across the unseen layers beneath your feet. A buried city is never only a dead place. It is a stack of decisions, meals, repairs, births, prayers, and fears. Archaeologists peel those layers with care. Scribes once arranged them with sacred imagination. Storytellers, inconvenient creatures that we are, keep trying to hear voices between the two. A quirky fringe tidbit claims that Sumerian records secretly preserve the fall of a civilization before humans, one ruled by beings mistaken for gods. Archaeology does not prove that literal claim, yet the idea survives because the texts themselves create a powerful impression of a world before familiar humanity, a structured age of divine workers, pre-flood kings, ancient sages, and vanished order. The fringe theory exaggerates the evidence, but it feeds on a genuine ancient strangeness. The more careful mystery is stronger. What does it mean that one of humanity's earliest literate cultures imagined itself as late to the universe? What does it mean that people who built cities, temples, canals, schools, and archives still looked backward and saw a prior system already in motion? Perhaps it means that civilization has always carried the sensation of inheriting something: land, language, tools, gods, fears, and duties all arrive before us. We are born into arrangements we did not design. That thought settles softly over the night. Scholars continue to debate how much of the Sumerian and wider Mesopotamian record reflects political theology, environmental memory, priestly tradition, literary pattern, or deep social change. Some emphasize the human institutions behind the divine stories. Others explore how myth preserves trauma and desire in symbolic form. The debate remains open because the tablets do not belong to one locked room. They stand at the meeting place of history, religion, imagination, and loss. You look toward the dark plain where no city lights shine. The stars appear cold, countless, and patient. In a modern bed, far from Mesopotamia, you may still feel the pull of those stars. The same sky that watched ancient scribes now bends over your own roof, although with more satellites, more noise, and probably fewer goats. Some improvements are debatable. The story asks for slowness. It asks you not to rush toward certainty. It asks you to notice the pattern. Divine labor becomes human labor. Hidden wisdom becomes civic order. Kingship descends, vanishes, and returns. Water gives life, then erases memory. Clay receives the human form, then receives the written word. The same material makes bodies, bricks, tablets, and ruins. Everything returns to earth, but not everything is lost. Perhaps that is why the Sumerian records still feel alive. They were made from clay, yet they carry breath. They were buried, yet they speak. They describe vanished ages, yet they expose familiar questions. Why are we here? Whom do we serve? What did we inherit? What happens when the systems above us fail? What remains when water, time, or silence passes over everything we built? No tablet answers completely. The oldest story remains unfinished because human beings remain unfinished. Every generation digs into the past and finds both evidence and reflection. We search for the civilization before humans, and perhaps we find something more unsettling. We find that humans have always imagined themselves standing beneath older powers, older memories, and older obligations. The pre-human world may be mythic, symbolic, theological, or partly shaped by forgotten environmental shock. Its certainty is hidden, its influence is not. Now the mound grows dim, the museum case fades, the river returns in the mind, moving slowly through reeds beneath a sky filled with ancient light. The first cities sink back into darkness. Eridu becomes a pale memory beside deep water. The sages withdraw into the marsh. The pre-flood kings stand far away, immense and faceless. The storm softens into silence. The clay tablet cools under glass. You are left with fragments, and fragments are enough for dreaming. You do not need a final answer tonight. The ancient world rarely offers one, and perhaps it would be less beautiful if it did. Let the unresolved parts rest where they are. Let the broken lines remain broken. Let the missing names keep their sleep beneath the mud. Some truths are not doors to force open. Some are lamps to sit beside until the flame lowers. The breath slows. The room around you becomes gentle. The old rivers move far away, carrying silt through darkness, laying down new earth over old secrets. Somewhere beneath the soil, a tablet waits without impatience. Somewhere in memory, a city receives kingship, loses it, and receives silence instead. Somewhere, the first human hands press into clay, and the clay accepts them. Perhaps the civilization before humans was never meant to be found as stone walls, shining machines, or a perfect hidden archive. Perhaps it exists as a shadow in the way ancient people understood themselves, as late arrivals in a world already heavy with command. Perhaps the gods were names for nature, power, memory, and labor. Perhaps they were something stranger. The tablets do not say enough, and perhaps that is their final kindness. They leave space for wonder, but also for humility. They remind you that the past is not conquered by knowing a few names. It is approached softly, through broken objects, patient reading, and the willingness to admit that some things remain beneath the water. You can rest now. The oldest cities are quiet. The scribes have set down their styluses. The lamps in the temple are low. The reeds move in the dark with a sound like breathing. The story has not ended. It has only lowered its voice, and perhaps somewhere under the clay, under the river silt, under the oldest written signs, the story is not yet complete.